What's up, guys? Welcome to another edition of Before the Whistle presented by BRK Insurance Group. If your business is looking for the best in employee benefits, commercial property and casualty insurance, or retirement and 401k plan services, there's no one better suited to meet your challenges and build a plan centered around your needs than BRK Insurance Group. What's going on, y'all? Happy Friday and welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy, and I'm going to keep this one a little short and sweet. I don't know if it's allergies or if I'm just getting a little run down after a couple weeks of travel, but my voice is waning just a bit, and I would like to preserve it as much as I can for this weekend's broadcast where Tulane's going to open up conference play against the USF Bulls. It's also going to be Hall of Fame weekend for Tulane, which always brings a nice air to it. It's really going to be a good chance for Tulane to set the tone and build off of a win that I think had a little bit of the good, bad, and ugly in it here and there, but ultimately quite a bit to build off of. I broke that mostly down on last week's episode, going over both sides of the ball, really all three phases where I think Tulane can improve and what I think they can really stand on. Something that's become clear to me this week is they can really stand on just a sense of identity and really a player-led team. That was something that John Summerall had stated back in July, back at Media Day. That was something that he really wanted. And just with my conversations with players, including linebacker Sam Howard, who I did a feature on, and just the air of practice, the way that they all speak to the media, it just feels like, again, the leaders are there, but they're all kind of starting to not so much speak the same language, but kind of speak the same language in that sense, where it's not just kind of repeating the same buzzwords, but I think you're really seeing a sense of buy-in and belief. And that's what I really would like to break down today, too. I think it also ties back to, I keep bringing it up, but I really do think that their response to adversity is just a fascinating psychological study and kind of one of the things that is at the heart of the show. So I'm going to dive into that. And then really, I think where Tulane really needs to lock in for this game. And a lot of that focus is on explosive plays for me, at least on the defensive side of the ball, and really shutting down an explosive quarterback. So that's going to be my focus on today's episode. And I will throw out there again one last time that the Daiquiri at Blue Oak Barbecue is running out for a chance to get one. So make sure that you go there this weekend, get yourself some before Tulane takes on the USF Bulls. As John Summerall said before our last 11 a.m. game, if you don't start drinking in the morning, then you can't drink all day, and you should start with a Daiquiri. Again, that's at Blue Oak at 900 North Carrollton Avenue here in New Orleans, and I will be getting one after a Tulane victory with my dad this weekend. So kind of getting into that. I'm going to go into a little bit of what I think the team really needs to improve on the field. But for me, being the sideline reporter at Tulane has really been such a pleasure. Just the stories that I've been able to follow along and the guys, just the character of these young men has really just been a joy to watch that really continue on. And I can't imagine any better season to start off than the 2-10 year. Yes, it was a bad season. It was every plane ride that we took home was one that was after a loss. So that Oklahoma plane was actually, Corey, Steve, and I were really the only ones with some experience doing that, unless guys were around for the 2-10 season. But I really got to see a lot of good in a team that really didn't win that many games. Yes, one of them that year was against USF, but Tulane really had something to prove that week following their really hard overtime loss. I still saw a team that kept it really close. I believe they had multiple losses at the end of their season that were by 6 points or maybe it was 3 points or less. There were a couple, though. They hung with UCF. They hung with Memphis, real contenders in the conference, despite having that 2-10 record. And then I got to go to spring camp that year and really hear these guys start to echo each other and say that they're going to the conference championship, which, yes, every person that heard that for the first time was kind of hard to fathom. But I really got to see that form super early on, just going to all of those spring practices. And so by the time July rolled around that year, that was when, most media starts attending camp. And that's when they really started to put that conference championship stuff out there. By then, I had really kind of understood it by now because I could see the buy-in over the last couple of weeks for them. I've now gone through 2 seasons of really wild success, the greatest single season turnaround in college football history, watching the Cotton Bowl, watching the success of last year, and then the harsh realities of college football that followed in the departure of Willie Fritz and a lot of guys in both the transfer portal and onto the NFL, especially at quarterback. I've now seen a quarterback competition, a new head coach. There's just been really so much to unpack. And it's really just been a great ride to follow along with the guys that Tulane has, both in the coaching staff, the character of the people that lead this team, and the guys that they have chosen to put out there on the field and lead one another in this brotherhood, they're all just such great men. That's something that's always been the case with every group of players that I've come here through. But that was one that when I came in, a lot of these guys, it wasn't their first rodeo. The 2-10 year, there were a lot of new guys out there, but the Cotton Bowl season, you had a lot of veteran guys out there that had spent a lot of time together and a lot of tough time together. And I think that really can't be understated, where when you go through that much hardship together as a team, I think it makes you appreciate the good times more, but really helps you kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. And when adversity hits in a season, it's nothing compared to what they really had gone through. And then last year's team, yes, they were following up with that team success, but there was still a lot for them to kind of prove and prove that that wasn't just a one-off fluke, and that this was a school that was now a place where you could have some success. And I think by all things considered, they accomplished that last year, but there's only a few guys left from those couple of years, just a few that were around from the 2-10 year. I think of Bryce Bohannon, Ethan Hudak, Caleb Thomas, Josh Remitich. I believe there's not too many guys left from that point. So this year, there have some tough times. And it's been really impressive to watch in real time a team that really hasn't gone through that much together be able to respond in games in real time. To me, you can't have a team that fights like Tulane has to start this year without one that's player led. The coaches can only give you so many words of wisdom when you're out there and you can't hear a word because the hostile environment of being in Oklahoma and the defense not really being able to make a stop. They allowed 21 points to a full deficit. The coaches can't get out there and make these guys have any mental toughness. That's something that these guys have really built together. But it was a good question going into the year of who would be the leaders. How would this team handle adversity? We can get to some of the issues on the playing field with respect to cleaning things up, playing a little mistake-free, but those two categories have been really well filled, all things considered. I think you have a team that has a really good sense of themselves, and it's not one that doesn't acknowledge the previous years, but it's also not one that is a carbon copy or is indistinguishable from those guys, because I think they have a lot more to prove. Yes, they're not coming off a 2-10 record, but there really weren't any guys that were around that were those marquee names that you could really feel confident about the standard really staying the same and that you knew what you were getting out of this group of guys. There was no Nick Anderson, Dorian Williams, Tajay Spears, Michael Pratt. But you have seen guys really step up there. And it, unsurprisingly to me, has come a lot from that linebacking core between Tyler Grubbs and Sam Howard. Again, I just did a feature on Sam Howard for Tulane on Sports Illustrated. Now, I feel weird plugging myself, but I'm plugging Sam Howard, and I would really recommend everyone go read it, especially people that have followed along with this program and really know how big of a leader Nick Anderson was. He just reminds me so much of him, and I think that's really, really important, both on and off the field. And I get to have a really awesome vantage point on the sidelines during games. I really get to see who, whether or not this player-led team exists or not, because on the sideline, the head coach can't go around and make sure that everyone's good. Every position coach has responsibilities with film and making adjustments. The guys, it's really up to them to remain mentally in a contest and keep their teammates in it just as much. That's where I've heard Sam Howard lose his voice pretty much every single game on the sideline, yelling at his teammates to really get going, both when things are good and when times get bad. And then Tyler Grubbs, to me, has been such a glue over a lot of the turnover and turmoil from the months of December, which seems like so long ago at this point. I will never forget he was the first player to come out on Twitter, X, it was Twitter at the time, and commit not only to playing in the Military Bowl, but coming back next season. And that was before Tulane had a head coach. That was before John Summerall had been hired. And right after that, there was a decent wave of players that immediately started committing either to the Military Bowl out of eligibility or committing to both the Military Bowl and coming back from next year. And I always really thought of Tyler Grubbs as reminding me a lot of Nick Anderson. And so, I've said that I told the story of running into Sam Howard in the parking lot after hearing about his leadership skills and then seeing him. And immediately he was the size of Dorian Williams. So I guess you could say you really have that 1-2 punch back at Tulane in terms of leadership. And to me, in terms of what they were able to do for the pass rush for Tulane. Thinking back to a lot of those wins in the Cotton Bowl year, thinking about the Kansas State game, a lot of those tackles for loss, sacks on the quarterback, Nick Anderson and Dorian Williams played a large role in that pass rush in Tulane's system where they rush 3, drop, they end up rushing 4, but it's a 3 man defensive front. One that hasn't really been super productive this year, but you see glimpses. And I think the linebackers being involved in some of those blitz packages has really done a lot to help with that. The only thing that really I think that starts to hurt is them getting a little bit tired and not bleeding into some things like the run game, which is something I'm going to get to in a little bit, but just keeping on this kind of, team identity. I think it's one of fighters. I think it's ones that want to really build their own pathway and legacy and chase the conference championship, but also lift up, as Sam Howard said in the article, the Dorians and the Knicks. They talk about them all the time for good reason. And I think this team emulates them in a lot of ways, but they're a little bit scrappier. It's a little bit, less great, clean football all 60 minutes. It's also a group of guys that largely haven't played any football together. Now you could say that they really have, and they've gotten through 4 games. They've come out 2-2, and they've responded to 2 tough losses. And for me, I keep looking at this response, and it's something I'm going to keep really looking at throughout the year. And it's something that, again, being on the sidelines really awards me the chance to see these things really happen in a game setting. The team's response to adversity being good as a psychology major. And quite frankly, it's kind of, when I think back to when I created the show, the idea before the whistle, the heart of it was all of the vantage points and, the relationships that Tulane has awarded me, both on the sideline and, through practice throughout the program that they allow our broadcast crew. It's allowed me to see. And as I went through all of those different changes and highs and lows, it's really taught me to see how much goes into a game plan outside of just what the X's and O's are going to be. It doesn't matter how good the X's and O's are if you can't communicate it well to your team and your team is checked out. So that's where I really look at things like psychology and having a psychology background. I thought that immediately when I had asked John Summerall what the good stood for on the Jumbotron, and he said that's what they audibly all yell when adversity happens. I really found that interesting, just because rarely do you have such a straightforward positive response to when things go wrong. There's no silver lining in the word good. It's not a bittersweet term. It's all positive. And I found that really interesting. You hear things about the benefits of positive thinking. And, there are studies that say if you smile throughout the day more, you will be a happier person. It's chemicals. It's just your brain chemistry. But there is a lot of psychology behind, I can't think of the word, but self-affirmations, saying things to yourself in the mirror, being kind to yourself and saying those things out loud. Those things do work. And so this to me was something that I definitely thought could work, but it was something that required buy-in to me, because you have to actually believe in that word in order for it to have any effect in times of adversity. So when again, Sam Howard, great quotes, great character, great person. He explained it really well. And he was one of the, players that I've had the opportunity to just ask them about how that response has really made a difference for them. And I agree with his response that, the mind is often stronger than the body. And if you just kind of let yourself sit there and let it wander, it's easy to kind of go to a place of negativity in those tough times on the sideline. Whereas if you have that response and you say good like that, it really allows you to just keep thinking, next play. So to hear that that's really not only been something that I've heard audibly on the sideline, but players actually find meaning and value in it. That to me, X's and O's is just as important as all these things I'm talking about here. But when you look at football from a college football level, it's so different to me than the NFL. So much of it has to do with young guys and keeping them checked in, keeping them focused, and keeping them together as a brotherhood. It's a lot easier said than done when you're student athletes. You have a lot of stresses going on in your life, and you're not, I guess you're making NIL, and that's a hot button topic going on in this world right now, but it's a completely different thing. And so I think the maturity of this team, the level-headed temperament of these guys, and the leadership that's very, very clear throughout this program, that is really, really important in order to go into conference play and be strong contenders. And that's something Tulane has in spades. Now to talk a little more, football here, I've gone over some of the areas that Tulane needs to clean up. I think they also know that the pass rush has to get to the quarterback. It's really going to matter this weekend, and the mistakes just have to stop. I suppose you could see one silver lining, not to just go back to that term that I just said doesn't, have the same response as good, but there has been a trend with penalties. They were a lot more on the offense to start the year. That was the first game where I think there was just one penalty on the offense, holding on Reggie Brown later in the game. Nothing that was just stifling drives, like false starts, illegal formation, just procedural penalties that were really having a lot to do with Tulane's issues, especially on that side of the ball. The defense, it wasn't that big of an issue. And then they had quite a few pass interference penalties last week. So they know they need to clean that up. The pass rush has to get to this quarterback. Byron Brown, he can do a lot of damage. To me, a lot of the damage, though, relies in those explosive plays. And that's something that Tulane has struggled with just as much as those other factors. Looking back at the last game, looking at when those explosive plays happened, yes, quite a few of them happened later on in the game, but it's something that you have to pay attention to. And it's something that really, we get the game notes every single week for both Tulane and for the opponents. We got USF's today. So just reading through what's quite a bit of information and trying to parse what the really important stuff is out of there. They have an explosive play section, and looking at it, they had 13 explosive plays against Southern Miss. That was a season high for them, and it tied their team or high. I guess the last two that season prior, they had two 13 play explosive play games, but they had 11 of those 13 on the ground, and that's something of concern, especially when you look at the fact that their quarterback can run. Byron Brown, in his 19 games that he's played in, he has 17 runs that have gone for 20 plus yards. I don't know exactly how everyone defines explosive plays, and I think you could probably see it here or there. I use the threshold of 15 yards or above. There's definitely, there's 20 plus yards, and Tulane's had quite a bit that have gone for 20, 30 yards. But looking at that and then seeing how many of in each category have gone for 20 or more, they've had 16 explosive plays, using my terms, in the last two games, and 10 of those were last week. That's, a little bit of a concerning trend, especially when 7 of those 10 came by pass, because there's a lot of damage that Byron Brown can do as a quarterback. I'm looking at the quite a bit of this information. I had it pulled up here, looking at Byron Brown and what he's able to do on the ground. He holds a lot of USF's records at that for that. He leads them in rushing, and he's 6th in the AAC. And he joined Jaden Daniels last season as the only 3,000-yard passer and 800-plus run player in the 2023 season. That's a lot of run plays. And he is a big guy. He is 6'3", 229. That's hard to bring down. It's something that Tulane has struggled with over the last couple of games as well. 5 of those explosive plays were quarterback runs, both by Jackson Arnold and by Ben Woolridge last week. They had 2 of those go for 20-plus yards. Jackson Arnold ran for 47 yards on one of those. They've only allowed 1 touchdown on explosive plays on a quarterback run, though, but that is quite a bit of damage. They allowed 2 last week by Ben Woolridge, but they also allowed a 73-yard run last week as well. Tulane has had a little bit of issues, I suppose, containing the run, especially with the addition of these mobile quarterbacks, but they haven't allowed 100-yard rushers in a season, and they allowed one last weekend, and I believe 2 weeks ago against Kansas State. I can't remember last weekend for that matter. But when you face quarterbacks that are able to extend plays with their legs and are able to also throw pretty far down the field, they also have Atkins, this slot wide receiver that he has a lot of short area quickness. He can do a lot of damage. Looking at that spear roll, it's going to be really important for Caleb Bransaw this week to be a leader on that in that defensive backfield. What I will say is he is the most veteran player out there, and he's the one that has played pretty much as many snaps in every game that I can recall. There's been a lot more rotation in the secondary outside of him, but if that's going to be really the key to shutting them down, you can at least rely on having that veteran presence, but this team is going to have to shut down the quarterback. I thought last week they were actually breaking through the line with respect to winning their one-on-one matchups, but that only counts for peanuts if the quarterback still ends up completing a pass. And they completed 6 passes for 20 or more yards last week. And that is a little problematic. Just starts to eat up the field. And it's really hard for the defense, I think, to kind of catch their breath and make those stops when you're able to do that type of damage on the ground and in the air. And they've faced quite a bit of quarterbacks that are able to do that. But Avery Johnson was a little more evasive. This guy is kind of more like a bull. It's hard for me to tell if the Virginia Tech quarterback really what was going on in that game, but it did seem like Tulane really had trouble bringing him down. They also kind of struggled with the size of Jackson Arnold as well. So weight room is going to matter this week. There was at least a very big temperature difference this weekend. And that's going to matter for Tulane, especially coming off of last week, because USF didn't go through the conditions that Tulane had to go through last weekend, where yes, there were a lot of explosive plays. A lot of them also came in the second half. And I gave a lot of that context in my last episode, but that is important to look at when you look at what the temperatures were during that game and how it just wore down both defenses, where Tulane scored 21 points in the third quarter and they allowed 13, 34 of the 74 points in that entire game. That is a lot. The last thing for me is the turnover battle, where last week Tulane didn't turn over the ball. They had 2 turnovers. One of those was returned for a touchdown. They've had 3 pick sixes in 4 games, which is pretty crazy. Games that they have turned over the ball, they are 0-2. Games where they have not, they are 2-0. That's something that I really can't ignore, especially looking at how important that is for USF, where in their last 17 games, when they have won the turnover battle, they're 7-0. When they have lost it, they are 2-8. So it's pretty damning, all things considered. And yes, there's only a small sample size for Tulane, but there's a reason that most coaches, one of their keys to every single game is protecting the football. And it might sound obnoxious sometimes and like it's coach speak for just not wanting to talk about some other things. It really does make or break football games most of the time. And through 4 games now, USF has 4 interceptions and 5 fumble recoveries. 5 fumble recoveries, that's something that is a little bit concerning because that to me implies that they are a defense that's going to punch you in the face a little bit. They are a little sticky in coverage, and it's going to be a big test for Tulane. If they're able to come out of this contest with a win and a convincing one at that, it's going to require that execution in all 3 phases. And that'll bode well for the rest of the season because this is going to be one of the more complete teams that Tulane will face. And it's a great way to set the tone for conference play. And with that, y'all, I will see you for a post-game recap next week.